Lana Brooks had not planned to return to Hillside University. Not after graduation, not after everything that happened. But when Professor Morgan texted her at nearly midnight, asking if she could step in to teach a creative writing class for one semester, Lana hesitated for less than a minute. It was not because she had free time. Her life was a patchwork of side jobs, freelance editing, ghostwriting, marketing, copy reviewing, submissions for a tiny online magazine. Money was always tight, and time even tighter. But there was something about that message, something in the words. They need someone who understands silence that felt heavier than a favor. So at 28, Lana found herself back in a narrow brick building with its flickering hallway lights and that familiar smell of old paper and carpet cleaner. Room 207 still had the same squeaky chairs and dusty windows, but standing at the front of the classroom, now looking out at 12 students who barely looked old enough to rent a car, Lana felt out of place in her own past. She smiled anyway, tucked her notes into the cracked podium, and cleared her throat. This is Writing Stories That Matter. I hope you're here to bleed a little. There were polite laughs. One or two students lifted their heads. Most kept their eyes on their laptops. Lana pretended not to notice. The first 2 weeks passed without incident. The students were quiet, but not unfriendly. Lana spent her nights marking drafts that ranged from forgettable to deeply promising, and her days bouncing between freelance gigs and library work. The class became a strange kind of anchor, one that reminded her why she had once loved words enough to chase them into debt. Then on the third Monday, someone new walked in. The classroom door creaked open mid-discussion. A young man stepped inside, tall and lean, with a calm, unreadable face. His clothes were simple: black jacket, gray jeans, a notebook tucked under one arm. He paused just inside the doorway, as if unsure whether he belonged. "I am sorry I'm late," he said quietly. "I just enrolled." Gavin Blake. Lana blinked. She had reviewed the updated roster that morning. No Gavin Blake. But something about the way he stood, not apologetic, not arrogant, just there made her nod before thinking too hard. "Grab a seat. We're talking character wounds." He nodded once and moved to the empty chair in the back corner. He opened his notebook without a sound. By the next class, he was early. Always alone, always quiet. Gavin never spoke unless asked. When called on, his answers were brief but thoughtful, the kind that made you pause after hearing them. He wrote more than anyone. Each assignment came in early. No email signature, no title pages, just thick paragraphs filled with tension and restraint, like someone trying to say something without letting the words betray him. He never volunteered to read aloud. When Lana asked, he smiled faintly and said, "Not this one. Not yet." She stopped pressing. But late one afternoon, after the room had emptied and the sky outside turned a pale winter gold, Lana noticed a folder left behind on Gavin's desk. It was slim and unmarked, but inside were 10 printed pages. She hesitated. Her instincts told her to leave it alone, but the first line caught her eye. "This is not a story. It is a last attempt to make sense of something I should have stopped a long time ago." Her breath stilled. She sat down and began to read. The story inside the folder was raw. Not in a stylistic sense. Gavin's prose was measured, deliberate, but in feeling. It followed a nameless young man, barely out of high school, who caused an accident that left his older brother in a coma. The family fell apart. The narrator dropped out of college, moved states, cut ties. He described walking through his days like they belonged to someone else, someone less guilty. But what stopped Lana cold was not the trauma. It was the honesty. There was no dramatic apology, no search for redemption, just quiet questions, ones that felt less like they were written for a reader and more like whispers into the dark. By the time she reached the final line, Lana's hands were trembling. If anyone reads this and is still alive, please write something kind for the person who isn't sure they should stay. She closed the folder slowly. The next class, Gavin was absent, then the next, and the one after that. Lana checked the attendance system. No record of his name. She asked administration. No enrollment. No registration. Nothing. She searched her email for any messages from him. Nothing. No digital trace. The folder remained on her desk for 3 days before she dared to open it again. She copied the last page, folded it, put it in her coat pocket. She told herself it was just a precaution. But part of her already knew something was wrong. That Friday, Lana stayed late at campus. It was nearly dark when she left the building. The air was sharp with early spring wind, and the sky held that heavy gray that always came before rain. As she passed the art building, a flicker caught her eye. A figure sitting on the bench outside. Alone, hood up, elbows on knees. Lana stopped. It was him, Gavin. She walked over slowly. The bench creaked as she sat beside him. He did not look at her, just kept staring at the sidewalk. "You weren't in class," she said. "I know. You left your story." He nodded once. "Do you want it back?" "No." They sat in silence. A long one. The kind that does not demand to be filled. Then he said without turning, "I didn't write that for a grade." "I know. Sometimes I think if I tell it just right, maybe it'll stop living inside me." Lana's voice was quiet. "Sometimes writing it is the only way to survive it." He nodded again. The wind moved through the trees. The bench felt colder now. "Did you mean the last line?" she asked. He didn't answer. After a moment, Lana reached into her coat. She pulled out a small notebook, flipped to a blank page, wrote something in slow, steady strokes. Then she tore the page free and handed it to him. "You are not a story that ends in silence." Gavin looked at it for a long time, then folded it carefully, slipped it into his coat. He stood, nodded once, and walked away. Lana stayed on the bench until it started to rain. Lana did not see Gavin again after that night. Not on campus, not in class. It was as if he had walked out of one story and into another one she was not meant to follow. She asked around gently, carefully, in case someone else had seen him. A classmate mentioned the quiet guy, but no one knew his last name. One student thought he was auditing. Another said they had assumed he was a grad student or maybe staff. But the truth was simpler and stranger. He had never been enrolled. After a while, Lana stopped asking. Instead, she found herself thinking about him late at night. Not in the way you think about someone romantically, but the way you remember a line from a book you never finished. There was something unresolved in his absence, and it echoed louder than his presence ever had. She opened the folder again on a rainy Tuesday, read the pages once more. Still raw, still real, still unfinished. That night, Lana sat at her desk for hours with an open document and a blinking cursor. She hadn't written anything for herself in nearly 2 years. Her last manuscript, a novel about sisters surviving a house fire, had been rejected by every publisher she tried. After that, she stopped calling herself a writer out loud. But now she found herself typing, not fiction, not even essays, just truths she had been too tired to name. Some wounds do not bleed. They settle. They become part of the architecture. It is possible to forget who you were, even when the world keeps calling you by name. I have spent years writing stories for other people and none for myself. I am afraid I no longer know what my own voice sounds like. Each line felt like pulling a thread buried beneath her skin. She wrote until her hands ached. Then she saved the file, titled it Draft Zero. And for the first time in a long time, she slept without needing music to drown the silence. Days turned into weeks. Lana kept teaching, kept editing manuscripts that were not hers, kept moving through life like it belonged to someone competent. But quietly, in small, stolen moments, she wrote. She started bringing her own work into the classroom, not to teach from, but to remind herself of what language could do when it was honest. Her students noticed the shift. A few started turning in better work. Braver work. Something was happening. Something slow and almost invisible. She was remembering. Not just how to write, but how to feel like the story of her own life had not ended. On the last day of the semester, Lana stayed behind after class gathering papers. When she opened the drawer of her desk, she found something unexpected. A small, worn notebook. Her name was written on the inside cover in precise handwriting. Lana Brooks. She turned the first page. It was not her handwriting. If you are reading this, I am still here. Somewhere. You told me I was not a story that ends in silence. So here is what I can give you, the beginning of mine. Below that, a new story began. A story she had not written, but one that had clearly been left for her. Lana read the notebook in one sitting. The story inside was more polished than anything Gavin had turned in before. But it was not the writing that held her, it was the feeling. Every sentence was like a coded message, just subtle enough to pass as fiction. But she knew better. It was about a boy named Luke who changed his name after his brother died in a car accident. The details matched. The brother had been a college athlete full of promise. The accident happened late at night on a quiet road 2 counties north. The parents stopped speaking. One moved out. The boy disappeared. But what haunted Lana most were not the facts, it was the way the boy described absence. Not just his own, but the world's indifference to it. Luke wrote about working jobs under assumed names, sleeping in motels, watching people live lives that looked like movies he had missed the start of. And then halfway through the notebook came a paragraph that made Lana stop breathing. I once sat in the back of a college classroom and wrote a story just to see if someone would notice I was real. She did. She wrote me a sentence I read 100 times. You are not a story that ends in silence. So now I am writing back. In case she still remembers me. In case she still wonders if the story meant anything. Lana set the notebook down gently. Her chest felt hollow, full, and sharp all at once. Gavin Luke, whoever he was, had left her something. Not just a message. A continuation. A thread back to a voice she hadn't realized she had been missing. She spent the next hour searching news archives. College athlete. Car crash. 2 brothers. 2 counties north. She found it in less than 10 minutes. Tyler Blake. Age 22. Died on scene. Younger brother survived. Name withheld. There was no photo of the brother. No mention of what happened to him after. The article was 3 years old. Lana stared at the screen, then back at the notebook. The handwriting, the structure, the honesty. It had all been true. And now she had no idea where he was. That weekend, she did something she hadn't done in over a year. She opened her old blog. It had once been filled with writing advice book reviews and a few confessional posts that had earned her a small, quiet following. But it had gone dark during her worst year. Now she clicked New Post. She titled it, To the Writer Who Sat in the Back Row. And then she wrote, "You left me a notebook once. It was fiction. But not really. I read every word, and I believed every silence. If you are still writing, if you are still somewhere trying to decide whether or not to stay, I want you to know the story is not over, and neither is yours." She hit publish before she could overthink it. The blog post sat quietly online for nearly a week, no comments, no messages, just a few anonymous views from unknown IP addresses. Lana tried to move on. She returned to freelance work, gave detailed feedback to her summer students, and even started outlining her own short story for the first time in years. But at night, she still checked the post, hoping. Then on a Thursday morning, she opened her inbox and saw a message with the subject line, "I think you knew my brother." Her heart stuttered. She clicked. "Dear Lana, my name is Erin Blake. I'm Tyler's sister. I saw your blog. A friend forwarded it to me and said it sounded like Luke. That's what we called him. Luke was always writing even when we were kids. He would leave poems inside cereal boxes, sent story prompts and Christmas cards. I'm not sure what to say except thank you. He's been gone for a while now, not dead, just unreachable. He cut ties with our family after the accident. But I know he's still out there because every now and then I get a postcard. Never a return address. Just a few lines always typed, never signed. The last one came 3 months ago. It said, "Someone told me once, I'm not a story that ends in silence, so I'm trying not to disappear. That's how I found you. If you hear from him, if he ever writes to you again, can you tell him I'm still waiting? Sincerely, Erin." Lana read the message twice, then 3 more times. Her hands were cold. Her eyes burned. It was real. All of it. And she wasn't the only one waiting. Later that night, she wrote back, "Erin, thank you for writing. I don't know where he is now either. But I do believe he's still writing. He was never trying to disappear. He was trying to be heard. If I ever hear from him, I promise I'll tell him. Until then, keep writing too. Lana." She stared at the word send for a long time before clicking it. Outside her window, the rain had started again, soft, steady, familiar. The next morning, Lana found a small envelope in her campus mailbox. No stamp. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded 3 times. Typed. "I saw what you wrote. I didn't know how to answer it. I still don't. I'm not good at being seen, not really. But I've been writing. I've been trying. I'm somewhere between chapter 1 and 2. Maybe one day we'll write chapter 3. Until then, G." Lana folded the page carefully and placed it inside her notebook. Then she sat down and opened a fresh document. 6 months passed. Lana finished her short story, then another, then a collection. Her old blog, once a side project, grew into something more. Readers left comments not just about writing, but about survival, grief, silence, and starting again. Women wrote in from hospital beds, from night shifts, from kitchen tables, between putting kids to sleep and going back to school. They did not ask for answers. They just wanted company in the waiting. Lana replied to everyone. Not quickly, not always perfectly, but always truthfully. She called it her drafting phase, a life between versions of herself. In late October, a publishing house emailed. They wanted to acquire her collection. They had read her blog. They believed her voice had something people needed. Lana stared at the message for a long time. She remembered how not long ago she had convinced herself she no longer had anything to say. She wrote back with one sentence, "I'm still finding the words, but yes." 2 weeks later, she taught her last class of the semester. She stood at the front of the room, sunlight spilling in through tall windows, and spoke with calm she hadn't felt in years. "This is not about writing the perfect story," she told her students. "It's about writing the true one, even if you're still living it." Some nodded. One girl teared up. Lana smiled, not to comfort, but to say, "I know." After they left, Lana packed her things slowly. There was no note in the drawer this time, no mysterious pages, but there didn't need to be. She walked out of the building into the crisp autumn air. That evening, a package waited at her door. No sender listed. Inside, a worn notebook, the same one she had left untouched for months. Tucked between its pages, a new sheet. Typed, "I've been writing again. Not just fiction. Letters, recipes, descriptions of rain. You taught me that words do not have to save anyone to matter. I am not healed, but I am trying. If you're ever ready, chapter 3 can begin. G." She turned the page. It was blank. Waiting. Lana placed the notebook on her desk. Brewed tea. Sat down. She picked up a pen, not a keyboard, not a screen. Then in her own hand she wrote chapter 3. She did not save him. He did not save her. They saw each other, and that was enough.